Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. My name is Ken Muir. I'm the chair of the panel for today for the DevOps Summit 2021. Just a brief background on myself. I've been around in this industry for almost 30 years. I've been very lucky and I've covered lots of different areas within the industry, almost worked up my way through every level. So I have a pretty good understanding of the industry. Today we have a number of guests with us, very esteemed guests with a tremendous amount of experience in their backgrounds, and I'll hand them off to you individually for their own personal introductions. So first off would be Thomas.
Hi, my name is Tom Sweet. I'm VP of Cloud Services at GM Financial. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and I will leave it at over 20. I won't give you how many. And I've done a lot of different things from development and QA and program management, and I'm running cloud now. I love it, and this is just an exciting time. It's never been a more exciting time to be in IT. And one more thing, my opinions are my own and not my employer's, GM Financial.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, Chris Hughes. Like Thomas, I've been in the industry almost 20 years, not quite 20, but almost 20. My background includes being active duty Air Force, as well as civil service at the Navy and FedRAMP, for those familiar with FedRAMP in the United States. I've also been on the industry side, doing DevSecOps and cloud security for organizations within the Air Force, Space Force, Navy, and the federal civilian government, and as well as some industry organizations as well. And I teach as an adjunct and host a podcast, and passionate about all things cloud and DevSecOps.
Excellent, excellent. Next up would be Mark.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good day, whatever it happens to be when the recording actually gets played, right? Mark Peters, I'm down in San Antonio, Texas. I did, like Chris, I did time in active duty Air Force. I did 22 years in the Air Force. I have been spending a couple of years in the industry now working with DevOps. It all relates kind of to the same solving of problems and the same processes. So that's really the part where I get excited. I'm the DevOps ambassador and the chapter chair for the US. So lots of chances to talk about DevOps. I'm excited to have another chance to talk about how we bring things together.
Excellent, excellent. So we'll start off into the questions. The way we're going to kind of run this is based on the timing that we have. I'm going to let you guys really respond to the questions that we have up here. I'll chime in as and where I see as fit, but just to sort of keep the discussions moving along. The first question that we have up here are, what do you see are the key trends for DevSecOps for the coming year and also probably for the next few years? And I'll go through, if you could take the same order that we went through from before, if you could start with Tom.
Sure, I see a lot of trends, excuse me, a lot of trends coming. One is more about open source software governance and making sure that it's being tested in the pipelines for not only security, but for licensing. Also a software bill of materials. So when auditors or teams wonder, what exactly do we have in our environment? Because if there is a vulnerability, sometimes companies don't even know if they're using that component. I see additionally old school financial services and insurance companies now really pushing to get into DevOps. You also see the traditional software development engineer and test role going away in software development as more of those that talent moves into cloud and DevOps from that older role. And then I think black box performance testing is going away more in terms of application performance management inside of application development, and then a strong demand for technical leadership will push into 2022.
Excellent. Mark?
So key trends is always a tough one, right? The smaller you get, the tougher it is to come up with a good key trend because it goes through the same. Within the next couple of months, we have a new version of the DevOps handbook coming out, which is always a good one for me, like to see what that is and kind of the basics. And that brings the key trend may be in that AI and ML and data ops, but the key trend should really be a continued emphasis on basics. The more people we bring into it, the more we have to continue to concentrate that they have to do the basic things before they can move into the more advanced technical or other solutions for their practice. So I do see the key trend with a lot of that. How do we use ML? How do we get these things involved? How do we move to these advanced solutions and say, no, you know what? despite the size of your company, you still need to be on the basics because you haven't gotten those basic releases, those basic deliveries down yet.
Yeah, so very true, actually. Let's go to Chris.
Yeah, I think Thomas and Mark both have great points on the basics fundamentals. We see that pervasive throughout security, and many years people fail to do the basics, and that comes back to bite them. And then Thomas had a lot of great points. I think some of the key trends and focuses we'll see is more developer-centric security tooling. We've seen acquisitions for organizations like Bridge Crew and Accurix, who do infrastructure as security type scanning and security activities. Both, one going to Tenable, one going to Palo Alto. I think we'll see a focus on value stream management and actually, focusing on how these activities deliver value to the organization, not getting so caught up in the nuance of the technology in many cases, which we all are guilty of, I'm sure. Thomas talked about the education and training aspect. I think we'll see organizations definitely invest in the workforce component and bringing up their staff and upskilling them around DevSecOps, the cloud native architectures and the tools that they'll be using. And then he also talked about the open source aspect. I think we're definitely in the public sector in particular, based on the executive order, seeing a big focus on supply chain security, third-party risk management, open source security, and things of that nature. So I think these are all things that we'll see a focus on in the coming years.
Yeah, I would like to add here, Ken, because I'm here to bring human in loop and, more importantly, women in loop for DevSecOps and security initiatives. I believe that it's extremely important at this point in time we consider contribution from not only communities to lay out the roadmap for DevSecOps, but also women contributors to take the front seat. And I believe that during the conversation, we will talk about different initiatives, how we could do that, and what kind of programs, initiatives we would see in 2022 and beyond in big, small, and medium enterprises. We could talk about that as well during this discussion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the points that were brought up are really good, actually, because if you think about how much money is actually being spent on protecting applications, but there's very little emphasis on actually creating applications that don't need a lot of protection in the first place. So these are really, really good points.
Well, and you create all those advanced applications, you bring in all those technical aspects, right? And then you get back to the, well, you left your password hard coded.
Yeah, exactly.
You go to SolarWinds where you didn't make the update when we told you to make the update. You were 6 months out of date, and that left these huge holes in your system.
Yeah, it's so true, actually. It's and then you have a lot of projects that started many years ago for building, all kinds of applications, and the companies that built these things have gone out of business since, and so there's no updates at all for this. And so the reliance on technology and other things to make sure that these don't go, and become infected with malware and stuff is a huge challenge just across the board. And we're going to see this more and more with IoT. Right, the development of applications and coding around, making these things work for whatever the applications are. We've got to be able to build in, secure coding into these things, because otherwise they're just going to become a liability, like so many other applications have been over the years.
But if I could add a comment on the IoT aspect, I think it's going to, like you just touched on, it's going to rapidly expand the attack surface, right? And a lot of that's going to come into play in terms of a lack of regulation around IoT and required security requirements and things of that nature. So we're going to have to see regulation catch up to where technology and the market is going, basically.
Yeah, it is. I mean, by 2025, there's going to be north of 70 billion IoT devices on the planet. 70 billion. There's going to definitely have to be some kind of structure and a global understanding of how we're supposed to put these things together to make them as secure as possible, including architecture and stuff.
There used to be a concept in a lot of manufacturing talking about planned obsolescence, right? When does it go bad? When do you plan for it to go bad so you can move on to the next thing? My milk carton has an expiration date. My IoT device should have a, at the end of the year, you can either need to update or move on, right? A little red sticker that shows up on it. So when people set it up in their house, that they know, hey, it's not good anymore.
That's right. That's right. But then you have to make sure you're building budget, for these planned obsolescence, and people aren't budgeting for security much to start with. So it definitely has to be even cultural shift in the way people really approach this too. That's great. Second question is, what is the future of AI in DevSecOps? What features should we start seeing in 2022 and beyond? And I'll start with Chris on that one. He kind of touched on that subject a little bit anyway, so be able to expand on that.
Yeah, I was going to say my thoughts on it could be used in many ways, but my thoughts immediately go to things that we've talked about and on the last question, like things such as the software bill of materials, the tool chain as far as that goes, infrastructure as code, things of that nature, supply chain security, for example. I think we're going to see automation and AI come into play around container vulnerability scanning, and even this, function as a service and serverless compute abstractions are going to have AI implications around security as well. So that's where some of my mind is in terms of AI and where it's going to come into play.
Excellent. Mark?
I think we need to see it on both sides. I think we need to see it on the side of helping us to get to those decisions and scans. And I think we need to see it on the side of helping us with better decision management, right? To help shape the focus of our tools before we even get into that chain, before we even put the code, in the computer. But what is the best set of decisions as we make it? How do we use an AI or decision management tool to go through, and for other solutions, where do we have options that'll bring us together? What are the three top options we've seen in security in the financial sector or in the telecommunications sector, as we're building our new business, whether it's a startup or whether we're shifting to that type of code thing. So I'd like to see more decision management and more of that type. And I'd like to stop seeing that everybody who comes to the table says, well, I have AI. And then you ask them about it, and it's no more than a comparison to something else, right? It's comparing two lines on the graph and telling you that they have AI.
I keep on popping into this discussion because it's excellent that we are having this conversation. And I would bring up a different perspective around when we talk about future of AI in DevSecOps. I would rather like to look at what are the strategic opportunities from here and beyond. So if you think about, and there could be many, but I would highlight what we found out in the white paper which we did last year. So digital twin technologies, I think this is something which will become a reality for many industries. Smart city ecosystem, and there's a large investment going in that direction when it comes to strategic opportunities for each country. Digitization of regulated industry segmentations, and we have two people who come from that background here in this conversation. So I hope that you would agree with me that there's a lot more to be done in that area. And I think a lot of investment would steer into the conversations around how the future of DevSecOps will be defined through AI capabilities, keeping in view these strategic opportunities. And I would also like to mention one, last but not the least, in energy and sustainability. A lot of the industry practitioners, and it is the topic on the board of many companies. How do you become energy efficient and sustainable? So I think these are the things which we should look out for when we are also looking at the future of AI in DevSecOps. Over to you, Thomas.
What I would really like to see is AI used for cost management. Like we just said, right? Sometimes companies say they have AI, but all they really have are just analytics. It's not really artificial intelligence. But I would like to see some AI around the cost management of cloud subscriptions, because when you look across 100 subscriptions or more in an enterprise with 12 or 15,000 total resources, how many are really being used? Why are they there? It's just hard to manage. So I would like to see something like that. And I'd also see something along the predicting failure based on a number of different factors, such as software development, code quality, code scanning tools, all those different pieces. And I'd like to see, AI used to predict that and to make go, no go decisions on deployments based on that. That's what I would like to see. Hopefully it'll come.
So I'd hop in the back and say, those are all great. And I agree with Garima, but she kind of fell into that same trap we talked about where we say AI, and it doesn't have any meaning other than AI, right? Or AI, right?
Yeah.
I talked to a vendor the other day, and the vendor says, we have these AI, ML based tools. The machine learning is driven by AI. It's going to give you great solutions. And I said, well, you need to show me an example. He says, well, here's an example of our AI doing stuff. And he pulls up this graph. At the bottom of the graph, there's a straight line. And he says, this is our baseline. In our AI, you see this spike, and it goes away from the baseline. So all those things will be rejected because they rejected the baseline. And I said, but the title of your graph is latency in requests. And you've set the baseline as 0. I don't need an AI to tell me that I have more latency than 0 in the system, right?
Yeah.
What are you really offering me with your AI?
But, you know, one of the, that's so, it's so true. One of the things that I always chuckle at is that, and for a lot of these vendors really, and their, you know, the sales guys should really be saying, you know, under the hood of our overly expensive technology beats the heart of a massive marketing engine that will convince you that, you know, what we have is the tool that's going to solve everything, because a lot of it is really just, you know, marketware, brochureware, as you pointed out, and it's so true.
This is the danger. I just want one last comment, like the danger for senior leaders in particular around these topics like DevSecOps and Zero Trust is that you have vendors who pitch as if like you just buy our product and you're DevSecOps, you're AI, you're doing Zero Trust. And it's really concerning because, you know, a lot of leaders have a gap between their technical proficiency. They're more focused on their business and things like that, and they can get caught up in that hype, and it can be dangerous.
Yeah, and because we are talking about brutal truths now, so I would also like to highlight what Thomas had actually mentioned a little while ago, that with the pay as you go model, it is very difficult to steer investment in security. And I can say that again, pay as you go model is not actually aligning with, you know, the security investments. And this is a brutal truth in every organization, in every enterprise. And the landscape of security is so diversified with cloud capabilities that I think we have difficulties to come to consensus that is there a certain framework, how we do systematic investment in our pipeline and for our pipeline. These are kind of relevant questions. And I think as we go along, some of these questions we could help getting answers from capabilities like, making your DevSecOps pipeline more data centric, and eventually, you know, if I say that, AI enabled.
Any comments?
I like to say, this goes back to one of my favorite topics, is right. What do you mean by security? When you say that you have it secure, when you say that you want it secure, when we delve into cloud and InfoSec and DataSec and AppSec, and what do you really mean? Do you want it to be breach proof? Do you just want to protect data at rest versus data in motion? Do you want it to be all the way through, or do you just want to, you know, do the good things so that you can say you've made a defense? When you go back and you look at companies that have been breached, the real impact, or why we don't see the investment in security, is because it doesn't change their long-term value proposition. They lose money for 2 to 3 days on their stock market, but by the end of the week, the end of the month, they're all pushing back up towards the top again, right? We have these major things, these companies that are rooted out. We have all these articles and all this news, but by the end of the year, they're 10 or 20% up on their billion-dollar valuation from where they were before.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you know, I think that what he's touching on is the harsh reality that, you know, a lot of the consumers and society is kind of fatigued on breach fatigue and security exposure. You know, we hear it so much all the time. I think people have gotten fatigued to it, you know, kind of, oh yeah, another security breach, you know, like it happens so often that, you know, people have become immune to it in a sense. But on the security note, just real quick, I think that's why it's important to emphasize that we're in the business of risk management, you know, understanding what your executive leadership's risk tolerance is and getting risk to the level that they're willing to accept, you know, besides just saying security. Like, it has to be tied to risk that can be quantified and communicated to leadership.
Yeah, I actually was going to comment on that. The two things that you guys brought up was, you know, there is fatigue in this. I mean, I get, you know, I've had news feeds coming in every day for, you know, many years about what's happening lately, and it's absolutely overwhelming the amount of information that there is about this, that you do end up tuning out, you know, trying to find those little nuggets of information that are really interesting is very difficult now. And the irony is it does actually help. I mean, if you look at Ashley Madison, I can't remember the name of the dating site that got taken down for illicit courtships. Their membership has gone through the roof ever since they had a breach, because it was a case of, hardly anybody had ever heard of them. And now all of a sudden they say, oh, I didn't know you did that. And then their memberships have gone right through the roof. They're hiring people like crazy. So it's so true. Like, it's had the complete opposite effect. I'll go into the next one. So what are the opportunities and also challenges as DevSecOps develops into our industry? And we'll start from Tom.
Sure, I have three of each. So the first is executive leadership at the C-suite level often still doesn't understand agile software development practices, and so therefore that does filter down into DevSecOps. And there's still confusion for DevSecOps teams who are still like trying to work with old school product management. And then the second is teams still have a poor definition of done. There are more and more companies moving towards DevSecOps, but their definition of done still is developers built it and product owner has accepted it, but there's no cybersecurity testing, there's no automated functional testing, there's no monitoring, yet the team thinks it's done and the product owners accepted it. And the third challenge is intermixing these DevSecOps teams with other legacy teams, such as maybe a firewall team, where the firewall team makes manual changes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, for example, and there's no automation of the firewall rules. And so everything else in the chain is still automated except firewall or another, something else similar to that, where it's just outside of their value stream. However, it's blocking them. So the three great opportunities are, as audit and compliance teams are now starting to get on board with this whole DevOps and movement, and we've had some great success with them checking in their code into our repositories. So they're now part of that process. They see how it works firsthand. We don't have to explain to them about the separation of duties and how everything is logged. They now can see it because they're part of it. I think tool integration still getting better and better, and that's awesome. And then another great opportunity is when internal teams offer, say, something such as pipeline as a service, where a product team can request a pipeline, and the pipeline is completely built for them with the open source scanning, with the security testing, with code quality tests, all that built in, and it's just turnkey. So those are three great opportunities that I've seen, and I think other companies can take advantage of.
Excellent. Mark?
So I think the biggest challenge is one we've already touched on here some, is to avoid having DevSecOps become simply another marketing term, simply another contractual obligation or a contractual agreement that companies put on or companies advertise without doing the things that we as kind of professionals in that space think of as the core of doing those things, right? Without making the cultural shifts in the understanding that these are not just things you bolt on top, but these are fundamental changes in the way your organization does business. And that relates directly to the opportunity to create success through having these flat hierarchical structures, through having this collaboration at all levels, rather than having something go up the chain and down the chain and up the chain and down the chain, and take 3 months each way to get something approved. The fixes you need are evaluated and used and produced by the end of the next sprint. 2 weeks later, you've got a fix that the customer requested. And instead of spending 6 months, you've got a responsive business model that can get you there. So I think those are the two big ones, and I think they're closely tied, right? Hopefully tied to what we've already been talking about.
Very true. Chris?
I think both these guys raised some great points. For me, some of the opportunities are things that have been traditionally spoke about when it comes to DevSecOps, like shifting security left and shortening feedback loops and expediting delivery, value delivery. But I think some other additional opportunities are things such as leaning into compliance automation technology, especially in cloud native environments, eliminating some of the manual activities around compliance and eliminating that bottleneck aspect, the sampling, continuous monitoring, which is never really actually continuous, leaning into some of that, compliance automation that cloud and now third-party, vendors are offering. I also liked what Thomas said around platform service offerings to let teams focus on their core competencies and delivering value and not have to stand up infrastructure and stand up all these things that they need to help facilitate delivering value versus just focusing on what it is they do exactly. That said, I think some of the challenges, and we touched on these in earlier questions, are things such as the workforce. The workforce is struggling to keep pace with where we're trying to go with the rapid proliferation of tools. Security teams in particular struggle to keep up with that. I think another challenge is existing policies and practices that are in organizations. I can tell you in the public sector and DoD in particular, Mark knows this, is if nothing else is the biggest impediment, it's existing policies and practices that sometimes are just so cumbersome and really struggle, strangle innovation and the ability to move quick and innovate. Aside from that, I like I think Mark touched on this too, was the decentralized decision making. I think that we need to push decisions down to lower levels and empower folks to make decisions, and understand what leadership's intent is and what leadership's risk tolerance is, and be able to be empowered to make decisions, based on that knowledge, instead of having these, legacy, technical review boards and this and that everything has to be fed up to and pushed back down. Like he said, that causes so much lag time in actually pushing forward decisions and getting things done.
Yeah, I think.
And I wanted to add one thing because Chris, you actually touched base upon the workforce part. So if I come from a community perspective, what I see is the opportunity and challenge. One of the core areas to focus on is human. And when you talk about the challenges, often people miss out on this aspect that even hackers are becoming more intelligent with technology. Hackers would be using AI and other, technology practices to ensure that they are more powerful. And how, you would construct your team, your skills, your competence to actually outline the opportunity. So communities have a bigger role to play in this. If I could introduce some of these disruptive ideas, like you would see people are trying out crowdsourcing security testing capabilities, like these hackathons. So it is making you more and more competent to build that team effort towards these kind of malpractices and finding the loops and filling the vulnerability gaps you have. So I think that's another important aspect to look out for.
Yeah, I mean, these criminal organizations and nation states, I mean, they are very agile. It's one of the things I always talk about with people is that they're highly motivated. These people, like 1,000 Zoom meetings I clicked on just decided to show up. Great
topic
technology.
is getting so interesting that it's that criminal organization coming in to hear what we're talking about. So
I know, and then all of a sudden they popped up. I always joke, like, it's these hackers, man, they just love a joke. They got this thing with media, microphones and stuff. I don't know what it is. So no, I was going to say about these nation states and cyber criminals. I mean, they're very agile. One of the things I always talk about in my presentations is the fact that they're highly structured, they're highly financed, they're highly disciplined, they're highly motivated, all the things that we're not, generally speaking, across the board. And so they will make use of any tactic or anything like AI to start using, provide more automation in there. We actually have an AI-based automated pen testing technology that we make use of, and it does a phenomenal job actually. But its intent is really to, and I think it's something that you mentioned earlier, was to really take away and remove the grind in that particular service. The pen testers spend a lot of time just doing the fundamental things. If you're following the kill chain process for compromising organizations, they cover off a lot of that stuff in a very short space of time, and allows the analyst to be able to to do their work and put their context around it. And in the case of DevOps, I also see that as being a way to create efficiencies, I think, especially with the challenge around finding the right people.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, I think it was Mark or Thomas who said this earlier. They talked about, how security tends not to be emphasized or prioritized due to it not, generating revenue, right? It's often seen as a cost center. But if you think about the adversaries and malicious actors, for them, security is the cost, is the profit generator. It's exactly what they're focused on. Where at organizations, it's the last thing they want to focus on because it doesn't generate revenue in many cases, at least not the way we typically tell it, the story. That's why we need to shift how we tell a story and talk about security as an enabler of a secure, delivering value for the business. And another thing, just real quick, I focus a lot on cloud and cloud security, and like you talked about adversaries using technologies like AI and ML. We're also seeing them use cloud environments to launch attacks from, because it gives them further anonymity, and it's so easy to stand up environments and shell accounts, shell organizations, and just conduct malicious activities through them.
Yeah, because in a cloud environment, they can build as much resources into that architecture as they need to be able to perform these types of things as well. And the fact that it's easily movable. I know that they track law enforcement activity to see whether or not they're on the radar closing in, and they'll move these things at will.
I was going to say, as we're thinking, I had a great story about talking about the companies that try to blend in the DevOps and don't get there, right? So we were working with a set of teams, and they were in an air-gapped environment, so they have to move things physically from one set to the other to get there. So the developers are working, and the developers are producing a couple of releases every sprint, which is not a bad cycle. As they produce the release, they'd move it over to the test team. The test team would take about a day to test it, make sure that it was integration ready, and then a day to two once they got it on the actual production site to deploy it. However, that testing and that integration was limited by the fact that the change approval board only met on Mondays to approve the new releases to be installed, and only if they'd already passed test at the time the configuration board met, and only when the configuration board didn't meet on a federal holiday, in which case they'd cancel the configuration board and have it the next week with a 2-week gap. And then they were only allowed to install on Fridays when they had the patch window to make the installation. So now you're adding in 9 to 10 days to a process that should only take you 3 days at most to do, but you're still calling it DevSecOps because that's what you paid for at the beginning of the day.
Right. So in the interest of time, I think we will have our final question. Can we wrap up with the final question and any conclusion remarks?
I think this is probably the best last question, actually, this one here. We did touch on it earlier a little bit, but I really think that it's an important question because nothing really happens unless you can get the C-suite involved in this. So it's really important to understand how do we make that happen. I'll start with, let's see who's going on there first. Let's start with Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep it short since we are doing this in the sake of time, but I think, is a lot of it comes back to storytelling, being able to emphasize why DevSecOps, increases the value delivery for the organization, shortening feedback loops with, customers and stakeholders, whether it's internal or external. I think another thing, and I want to throw this out as a kind of a nod to Thomas, and I talked about this before we went on recording here, is he's an executive, right, in an organization, but he's also certified in some highly technical certifications that are very challenging and hands-on. And I think more executives need to take that approach of understanding the technology, its implications for organizations, how it works, how your teams are using it. And I just want to throw that out there as like a major plus that I've seen. A lot of leaders need to move in that direction, and it helps them understand what their teams are doing, how they're using things, how things work, what this means to the organization, what some of the challenges are. So that's my short take.
Mark?
So I think the hardest part of this conversation with the C-suite is walking in and telling them, you tell me what you want, then you've got to give me 6 months and I will get it back to you. So you can't ask me for weekly status reports. You can't ask me for daily updates. You can have access to our boards and the visibility just like everybody else, but we're going to do it, and we're going to find a way to do it, and we're going to deliver quickly, but you just have to trust us that we're going to do it.
A great point. Tom?
You need to have the metrics also, and because once you have the metrics, data takes the emotion out of it, and then you can present, give you the storytelling you need to tell. But again, data takes the emotion out of it, because as we're changing processes, we're making people uncomfortable. Having the right data, having the metrics to back up what's happening really goes a long way in that storytelling.
I just want to say one last thing. I actually just read a great piece that touches on what Thomas said around metrics. It talks about how to use and abuse the DORA metrics. We all know the DORA metrics around DevSecOps. And it talked about the concept of a vanity radiator, right? Like you highlight these metrics in terms of how quickly you're delivering and releasing and things like that. But is it tied to any objective, value delivery for the organization, whether internally or externally? And I think that's something to keep in mind, is like, not only metrics, but outcomes, not just outputs, but outcomes.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. I mean, in all aspects of security, one of the things I'd learned as well, and you guys pointed it out, was it's one thing being able to present, here's a solution to your particular problem stuff, but you need to have a roadmap and some graphs to describe, sort of projected outcomes, with whatever the milestones that there are in there, because without kind of seeing that, and it does take the stress and the heat off you, because what you're saying is that I'm showing you what the roadmap's what it looks like. I'm showing you where the milestones are today, and all you're going to hear from me is we achieved it, or we didn't because of XYZ reasons. To remove the amount of noise as such, I guess, in between, which can just add to the stress of doing it. So it's a very good point.
We've all seen the team that gets 100 bugs back, and instead of fixing them all, they save them so they can deploy one a day. Make those metrics look better. As soon as you get a metric, somebody's looking for a way to go around it.
Too true. So you have to really stand your ground. Then is the message, and make sure that you follow along. And that was it.
Okay, thank you very much for today's conversation, and hopefully we will find more interesting content during the DevOps Summit 2021 and beyond. So I would like to thank all our esteemed guests, and as well as I would like to thank Ken Moore. Thank you for actually steering this conversation on this difficult topic.
Yeah, no, it was truly fun, and I really appreciated meeting all you guys. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.